What's up, guys? It's me, Tiff, and Sam Bankman-Fried's second criminal trial has officially been canceled by the government. Yes, Sam Bankman-Fried already went to trial last year and was found guilty on all 7 criminal charges he was being tried for and already faces up to 115 years in prison. But yes, he was indeed scheduled for a second criminal trial to begin in March 2024. In a letter to Judge Lewis Kaplan last Friday, the government said that in the interest of expediency and to avoid presenting duplicative evidence, they do not plan to proceed with a second trial against Sam Bankman-Fried for conspiracy to bribe foreign officials, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, conspiracy to operate an unlicensed money transmitting business, substantive securities and commodities fraud charges, and lastly, the charge that most people are very riled up about, the campaign finance charge. Notably, though, the government had until February 1st, 2024 to notify the court whether or not they plan to proceed with this second trial, but they seem to have very strategically decided to file this letter on the Friday evening sandwiched between Christmas and New Year's weekend, presumably because they did not want this to get much media or press coverage. But people on Twitter are fuming, particularly because this second trial was meant to address Sam's political donations, which we'll talk about in a bit. But first of all, for some background, why was there a second trial in the first place? Well, when Sam Bankman-Fried agreed to be extradited from the Bahamas to the United States, a warrant of surrender was issued. A warrant of surrender is basically a formal document authorizing the transfer of a fugitive to the custody of a requesting country and lists all the charges for which he or she is being extradited. Well, apparently, Sam's warrant of surrender did not include his 8th charge, the campaign finance charge. According to the rule of specialty, which is a fundamental principle in international extradition law also present in the US-Bahamas extradition treaty, and which protects extradited individuals from being tried, detained, or punished for offenses beyond the specific charges for which they were extradited, Sam could not be detained, tried, or punished for this 8th campaign finance charge without the Bahamas' consent. In fact, the government even acknowledged in their letter last Friday that the Bahamas informed the US that it had not included count 8, the campaign finance charge, in the counts for which it had extradited the defendant, and that the Bahamas did not consent to trial on this charge. Thus, the government was prevented from proceeding to trial on count 8 due to its binding treaty obligations with the Bahamas. Furthermore, on March 28, 2023, months after SBF had agreed to extradition, the government brought additional charges against Sam Bankman-Fried in superseding indictments. These charges included conspiracy to bribe foreign officials, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, conspiracy to operate an unlicensed money transmitting business, and substantive securities and commodities fraud charges. But again, since these charges were not included in the original offenses listed in the warrant of surrender agreed upon by the Bahamas, Sam could not be tried, detained, or punished for these additional charges without the Bahamas' consent, since this would be a breach of the US-Bahamas extradition treaty. So apparently Sam's team launched a legal challenge in the Bahamas last year, and the court severed these additional charges from the original trial. The US government seemingly tried to get around this by moving these additional charges to a second trial scheduled in March 2024, presumably hoping the Bahamas would give their consent or waive the rule of specialty in the meantime. However, in the government's letter filed last Friday, they admit that the Bahamas has not agreed to waive the rule of specialty, and the government does not have a timeline for when the Bahamas may respond to its request. In other words, the US literally cannot proceed with this second trial against Sam Bankman-Fried without the Bahamas' consent, otherwise it would be a breach of the US-Bahamas extradition treaty and be presumably illegal. If the US were to just forge ahead with this second trial without the Bahamas' consent, it could invalidate the trial. Sam could argue that his right to a fair trial was compromised, which could lead to the verdict being overturned anyway. It would obviously also strain the relationship between the US and the Bahamas. Basically, it just seems like the US government did a sloppy and rushed job bringing these additional charges, and now they can't pursue them. I wanted to take a moment to thank the sponsor of this video, Claims Market. It looks like FTX may have a very long road ahead, and not all FTX customers want to sit through a potentially multi-year bankruptcy. Well, Claims Market offers FTX customers an option to get access to immediate liquidity. Claims Market is basically a marketplace where you can list your bankruptcy claims for sale, and almost 50 onboarded buyers will compete and bid for your claim to make sure that sellers get the best price. I would also just like to point out that FTX claims are currently selling at the highest prices they've ever been sold. And notably, FTX claims prices continue to increase. The generic pricing for large claims is currently between 68 to 73% of the claim value. Claims can be sold quickly, sometimes even the same day that they're listed, and you can view this on a transparent transaction history at claims-market.com. In fact, Claims Market is the only broker to have publicly visible and transparent documentation. The majority of trades are confirmed within 2 to 3 days of listing. Once a trade is confirmed, buyers are contractually obligated to send payment to the seller within 2 business days. This offers FTX creditors a path to fast liquidity. There are 0 fees to the seller for listing or directly selling their claim, only for smaller claims that Cherokee buys. Cherokee is credible. They've actually transacted the most crypto claims in all bankruptcy cases, including FTX. In fact, over $200 million of crypto claims have been traded on claims market in the past year. They also have almost 150 five-star Google reviews. If you want to sell your bankruptcy claim for immediate liquidity so that you could maybe reinvest it back into the market or just do whatever you want, Claims Market is an excellent choice, and you can find them on Twitter at claims_market, on YouTube at Claims Market, on LinkedIn under Cherokee Acquisitions. And to be clear, I am not telling you to sell your claim. I would never tell you what to do with your money, but if you're in need of immediate liquidity and just don't want to sit through a potentially very long bankruptcy, then Claims Market is an excellent option. So thank you to Claims Market, and back to the video. Obviously though, there has been an uproar on Twitter, but I kind of understand it. It's an election year and Sam Bankman-Fried obviously donated a lot of money to politicians. And suddenly, seemingly conveniently, the trial that would address his political donations was dropped by the government. A ton of conspiracy theories are popping up now, claiming that the only reason the second trial was dropped was to protect Sam Bankman-Fried and Democratic politicians from being implicated. A lot of these conspiracy theories seem to be coming from the right, claiming that the DOJ persecutes those on the political right while going soft and even protecting those on the left. Republican Representative Tim Burchett says, "So we won't know which politicians he bribed or whose campaigns he influenced. That collective sigh of relief you are hearing is from the deep state." Conservative commentator John Cardillo also weighed in, accusing the DOJ of shielding Democrats from being named as recipients of Sam Bankman-Fried's donations. But Sam Bankman-Fried was actually quite public with his donations to Democrats. On my first phone call with Sam Bankman-Fried, he actually admitted that he donated a lot of money dark to Republicans.
Donated to both parties. They donated about the same amount to both parties this year. That was not generally known because despite Citizens United being literally the highest profile Supreme Court case of the decade and the thing everyone talks about when they talk about campaign finance, for some reason, in practice, no one can possibly fathom the idea that someone in practice actually gave dark. So, I don't know, all my Republican donations were dark. If you won't see them. And the reason was not for regulatory reason. It was because reporters freak the out if you donate to a Republican. They're all super liberal and didn't want to have that fight, so I just made all the Republican ones dark.
So those were obviously not quite as public. So I feel like if either side were to be exposed in the second trial, it would be the Republicans he was donating to. But what do I know? I don't consider myself particularly political. I'm not super far right or super far left, and I don't even talk about politics on this channel. But I do have trouble buying some of these conspiracy theories. I can see where they're coming from. I can see how it looks fishy that Sam Bankman-Fried's second trial that would address his political donations was suddenly dropped on an election year. But I feel like these people just probably haven't been following this case very closely, and they're probably just seeing random headlines and tweets stating that Sam Bankman-Fried's second criminal trial that would address his campaign finance violations has suddenly been dropped. And it just seems like nobody was aware of or is paying any attention to the whole conflict with the US-Bahamas extradition treaty, because this isn't just an excuse that was pulled out of thin air last week. This has been sort of an ongoing discussion ever since Sam Bankman-Fried was hit with those superseding indictments in March 2023. Because technically, the US government wasn't allowed to bring these additional charges without the Bahamas' consent, and without the Bahamas' consent or a waiver of the rule of specialty, the US literally can't proceed with the second trial. Otherwise, it would be a violation of the US-Bahamas extradition treaty. Also, to be clear, this is coming from someone who is looking forward to attending the second trial if the Bahamas consented to it, because I'm all for transparency and learning about what really happened, and I literally already paid for accommodation in New York in March because I was planning to cover it. But in addition to the whole US-Bahamas extradition treaty, the government made some additional points for why they don't plan to pursue the second trial. They point out that much of the evidence that would be offered in the second trial was already offered in the first trial, including the defendant's scheme to make unlawful campaign contributions. And in case you don't remember, I did attend every single day of Sam Bankman-Fried's first criminal trial in person, and I covered it on this YouTube channel. And the government did indeed introduce evidence of Sam's political donations and the money that apparently went to Chinese government officials. If you didn't watch my video on how Ryan Salem somehow got Thai prostitutes involved in trying to regain access to $1 billion that was frozen in Chinese bank accounts, it is on my YouTube channel. But apparently, all of this evidence that was introduced can be considered by the court at the defendant's March 2024 sentencing. And because a trial on the additional counts would feature much of the same evidence that was presented at the initial trial, a second trial would not affect the US sentencing guidelines range for the defendant because the court can already consider all of this conduct as relevant conduct when sentencing him for the counts that he was found guilty of at the initial trial. Basically, it sounds like a lot of the evidence would be duplicative, so it would kind of be a waste of government resources and taxpayer dollars if all of the conduct can be considered at his sentencing anyway. And Sam is already facing up to 115 years in prison, so the government says that the interest in avoiding delay weighs particularly heavily here, where the the judgment will likely include orders of forfeiture and restitution for the victims of the defendant's crimes. And personally, this does seem like a reasonable and practical decision, but I'm obviously no lawyer, and Laura Shin, who's great and had me on her channel a month or two ago, actually spoke with two former federal prosecutors. This conversation was from immediately after Sam's verdict, and they discussed the possibility of the second trial.
I would expect, and I hope, that the government says enough is enough, we don't need to pile on, and doesn't proceed with the campaign finance charges, moves to sentencing, and then you'll see an appeal play out. I would hope and expect that that's sort of how it goes.
Like, why would you hope that they wouldn't do the second trial?
Because I think it's sort of like piling on. The guy's already been beaten. He's been convicted of 7 charges that carry a maximum potential sentence of over 100 years. Do we really need to spend judicial resources, taxpayer resources, government resources, the time and attention of so many witnesses coming to court and proving up these charges when the government already has, it already has more than enough to punish Bankman-Fried for what he did? Moreover, the government is allowed to introduce the evidence of Bankman-Fried's campaign finance crimes as relevant to sentencing on the charges he's been convicted of, because the court at sentencing can consider anything, pretty much. They can consider uncharged conduct in deciding sentence. It's relevant to the sentencing factors. So as a practical matter, what's the point of moving forward with that? Why do it? They don't need it.
So, like I said, this all makes sense to me. I'm not personally much of a tinfoil hatter. I can see how all of this timing looks fishy, but I also think that too many people are completely ignoring the whole US-Bahamas extradition treaty issue. Obviously, though, this does leave some stones unturned, which is kind of a shame, and I was personally curious to watch the second trial. But let me know what things you're still curious about and what unanswered questions you still have. I'd also like to say that Judge Lewis Kaplan can ultimately do whatever the fuck he wants, and I don't think Judge Lewis Kaplan was necessarily a fan of Sam Bankman-Fried. This is also obviously a high-profile case with a lot of media attention, so I think Judge Kaplan might have a lot of incentive to give Sam a very harsh sentence. I'm someone who personally lost a lot of my life savings to another crypto company called Celsius Network, but I've said this in other videos and I know it riles people up, but I personally do not support life sentences for nonviolent criminals. I personally care way more about restitution and clawbacks and getting as much money back as humanly possible, and while some amount of prison time is obviously warranted and might serve as a deterrent, and I obviously think he should be barred from financial services for the rest of his life, it doesn't actually do customers any good for the guy to actually die in jail, and for taxpayer dollars to go towards feeding and housing him until the day he actually dies. I'd personally rather see him work to repay customers little by little. But that is just my opinion, and I know the majority of you guys disagree. And this is a whole other discussion we can have, but I'm gonna end the video here. So it's officially 2024, and I wanted to say Happy New Year, and also thank you guys for following along on this weird little journey I've had over the past year. I started this YouTube channel a year and a half ago because I lost the majority of my life savings to Celsius Network, and I was also going through a breakup, so I was honestly suicidal at the time. So I started this YouTube channel basically as a place to vent and just to have something to do and keep me busy, but so many unexpected things have happened since then. I've met so many awesome people through this. I also met Sam Bankman-Fried through this. But anyway, thank you for following along on this strange little journey. I have had zero plans through all of this. I've just kind of ended up here, I guess. But I don't have a plan for where I want to go after this, but I'm certainly not going anywhere, so let me know what you want to see. I'm also very active on Twitter at tiffanyfong with 1_, on Substack at tiffanyfong.substack.com, and I've been streaming on Twitch, which I've found very fun because I get to just chat with you people. So my Twitch is Tiffany Fong TV, and I'll leave all my links in the description box. Oh, final note, I'm actually meeting up with Gene Borello, I think next week. If you didn't watch my interview with Gene, he's an ex-mob enforcer who was actually in jail at MDC with Sam Bankman-Fried. So he had some very interesting stories to tell about Sam getting nearly extorted. But if you have any questions you want to ask an ex-mob enforcer for the Bonanno crime family, then please send them my way. We will probably record some kind of in-person interview thing. Anyway, I love you all so very much, and I'll talk to you all very, very soon. Bye! He was actually in jail with Sam Bankman-Fried. You stood up for Sam at some point.
When he came in, right away, some little dirtbag tried to grab him up because they were trying to get in his pockets. I knew right away. So me and my friends in my section already seen the move, what they were trying to do. So these little young gang members, fake gang members, whoever they are, they grabbed him up and told him to come move in his section. You could tell he didn't want to be there. He was just nervous. He's out of his element. You know, he doesn't hang out with gang members in the street. Now he's sitting with bloods. Like 3 days go by, I think it is, 4 days go by. You know, we've been talking here and there. The kid doesn't want nobody talking to him, trying to control him, tell him what he could do and can't do. So Sam Bakeman's trying to come over and talk to me and my friend, and the kid seen it and then called me over and says, yo, I don't want you talking to him. I don't want you doing nothing to him. I says, bro, listen, I know what you're doing. You're not taking nothing from him. I says, he's not giving you nothing. And the kid swung at me. And then that was it. I beat him up all over the place. I went to the hole for 80 days. I wouldn't stop.